Welcome to the Talk Like a Leader podcast, where we explore the mindset, skill set, and habit set of leadership communication. Using these tips, techniques, and tactics, you'll be able to talk like a leader to build better relationships and get more done. Your host is Guy Harris, who has more than 20 years of combined professional and military experience in consulting, coaching, and training in areas like team and interaction dynamics, communication strategies and tactics, as well as emotional intelligence. Take it away, Guy.
Hi, this is Guy Harris. Welcome to the Talk Like a Leader podcast. This week's episode is titled Leading Remotely, The Importance of Intentionality. This episode builds on an episode I did in March with my friend and colleague Wayne Turmel. The title of that episode is When You Suddenly Find Yourself Leading Remotely. I like to build on a key concept we talked about in that episode, just build on it a little bit and expand. It's the idea of intentionality. Leading remotely, communicating from a remote environment requires more intentionality. And by intentionality, I mean thinking about not only the need for the communication itself, but also the mode or medium of communication, and really clear delivery of the message, because there are so many ways when we're remote from each other that the message can get garbled, misunderstood, misinterpreted, those kind of things. So I propose 3 M's for intentionality. And the M's are meeting, medium or mode, and message. Meeting, medium, and message. Meeting, meaning remembering to make it happen at all. Medium, meaning how are we going to do this? Richness versus scope. How are we going to meet? And message, structure, delivery, clarifying, those kind of things. I'll take these one at a time. So the meeting. One challenge in working from a remote environment or leading remotely is remembering actually the need to communicate and the importance of a leader initiating contact. Remembering that incidental hallway, break room, coffee pot, lunchroom, conversations just aren't going to happen because we don't incidentally see each other when we're working remotely. So as a leader, you need to remember to initiate contact with the people on your team. Remember that it's probably not going to happen accidentally. You have to plan and create and start the communication. You see, it's easy to forget to communicate or make assumptions when you don't see people regularly. And the absence of information or the absence of contact can lead to building up of negative assumptions about other people and their intentions. One way to head that off is for the leader to create opportunities not only for the leader to communicate with team members, but also for team members to communicate with other team members, to head off absences of information or negative assumptions about other people. Frankly, it's going to take more work because it's not incidental. And here's an example from this week. I was working with my colleague Barb, and she had some information from a meeting with a client that needed to be shared with both me and Kevin Eikenberry. Well, if we were in a physical office location, we probably could have just walked to Kevin's office and talked to him. And that's not the way we're working right now. I'm in South Carolina, Barb is in Indiana, Kevin is in Indiana. We each have busy schedules. We can't just pop our head in the person's office and look for time to talk. We have to plan it. So it took us maybe 10 or 15 minutes of instant messages and emails back and forth to find a time when the 3 of us could all get together to talk. And it took scheduling in the future to make it happen. It was more effort, and I think it'll be worth it. In addition to initiating contact and putting the work into remembering to create the meetings to start with and to schedule the meetings at the right place and time, there's the issue of the medium we use for communication. One thing to remember is that in a remote environment, we have lots of different options at our disposal. We have instant messaging apps of various kinds. We have text messages. We have emails. We have phone calls. We have video calls. Choose the right medium. Consider if it's best to write this message or to call the person. Is it best to call this person or to schedule a video chat? Remember the idea of richness versus scope that Wayne and I talked about in our previous episode. And that's the idea of scope, meaning how many people can you reach at one time, versus richness. Richness meaning the depth and quality of the communication. As a general rule, the more personal interaction there is, the more richness. The more we can add voice tone to a written message by having a phone call, probably the better the communication goes. Or one step further, a video call to add facial expression and voice tone. Is a video call as good as in-person face-to-face? No, it definitely is not. It is richer than a phone call, and a phone call is richer than a written message. And the challenge from a leadership perspective is that it is often easy to choose what is the easiest, or apparently easiest, lowest effort medium rather than the best medium. It's easy to assume that an email will suffice when what this communication needs is a phone call or a video call. By intentionality in medium, I mean think carefully about what it is exactly you're trying to communicate. How sensitive is this message? How easily could it be misunderstood? How much depth and richness would be added by a phone call? And honestly, how much faster would it be? Because to write a well-constructed written message might actually take you longer than having a phone call. Just consider that idea. And we'll get into that in just a minute when I talk about message, because I'm going to focus on written messages more than phone or video call. Phone and video more closely approximates regular face-to-face communication. The places where we can often mess up communication the most, especially remotely, is in written communication. So intentionality of medium. Pick the right medium. Pick, in preference, I would say, the richest medium available to you, given time constraints and technology constraints. Okay, now message. Like I said, I'm going to focus primarily on written messaging because I think, frankly, most of the other episodes I've done will build on your skills and abilities in spoken communication or in video chat where it's both spoken and visual. Let's focus a bit on written communication and how that can go wrong. Remember, there are technology challenges with written communication. You can have spam filters and firewall blocks. Maybe not a huge issue if you're working within the same team, but it could be. Because if you're not all using the same server, maybe a spam filter sees your email as spam. I've had emails within my team get blocked by a spam filter, even though they're coming from the same originating email sender. My local machine sees it as spam and filters it out. It happens. So one thing to consider is, did they even get the message you sent? Spam filters, firewalls, all those kind of things get in the way. And even if they got it, do they remember it? Remember that instant messages, texts, and emails can easily get buried by other messages. That's especially true for IMs and text. So did they remember it? Maybe you have to confirm that they remember it and not be annoyed that they lost it in the 50 other instant messages or texts they got in the meantime. And then you have to consider, did it communicate what you intended it to communicate? Remember that written messages tend to be received a bit more negatively than intended, and we have to work harder to make them sound positive. We have to work harder to overcome a very natural human tendency to read written messages a bit more negatively than we intend. So one thing you can do is anticipate points of confusion for others to head off this tendency. Recent example of thinking ahead. Just here's an example of how you can think about points of confusion. I was submitting an invoice to my colleague, Kevin Eichenberry. Part of our business relationship depends on me putting invoices in to get payment for services I've provided through and for the Kevin Eichenberry Group. Well, there was one particular service that didn't fit neatly in a category of things we've talked about prior, although it was sort of like other things we've talked about. So when calculating what I would call the fee for that particular service, I felt compelled to explain to Kevin the basis I used to calculate the number. Now, we have a great deal of trust, and odds are he wouldn't have read anything negative in that invoice at all. The idea is thinking about what might lead to confusion for others and putting a little bit more intentionality into clarifying it just to make sure. And then in terms of overall messaging, remember to keep it positive. You want to think about what to do rather than what not to do. I'm reminded of an email I sent many years ago, probably 20 plus years ago, to a colleague, and I specifically said what did not need to happen. I even bolded and capitalized the word not so that they would not take a specific action. Well, they did exactly what I asked them not to do, and when I talked to them later, they just didn't see the not. At the time, I thought they were an idiot. Now I realize that's perfectly natural. There's a certain part of how we as human beings read messages, pattern recognition challenges. We tend to see patterns and anticipate challenges and fill in blanks. We get attentional blindness. We get all kinds of things that can cause us to read things poorly, especially when we're in a hurry or under stress or tired or something like that. I realize now, thinking back, this person was not an idiot. This person was in a hurry, and they just frankly didn't see it. So in the end, it was my fault. I didn't phrase it the best way. I phrased it in a way that was easier for me, what not to do. With a little bit of intentionality, I could have turned that around to say what I wanted rather than what I didn't want. Probably would have turned out better. Another thing is to consider the other person's style. Do they like data first or results first? All this is related to the DISC style we've talked about in other episodes in the Talk Like a Leader podcast. How do we frame the message so they can see the importance of it? How do we make the message stand out in a sea of emails and text? What can we do with the subject line? What can we do with the structure of the email? How specific can we make the call for action? Think about formatting, bullet points, bolding, underlining, italics, things like that. White space to draw special attention to things. The number of lines per paragraph. If you really want somebody to see something, make a single sentence paragraph. We don't have to do 10-sentence paragraphs like I learned when I was in English in the 9th grade. Remember that the length of sentences, shorter sentences are more clear, typically. And then before you send the message, read it from the reader's viewpoint. What do you know or assume that they might not know? What implied message is in the email that you might need to clear up? Is the sentence structure clear? Is it easy to read? Is your main point or are your main points obvious? Is it really easy for the other person to pick out your main points and the specific action you're asking for? How could it be misread or misunderstood? These are things you want to think about before you send the message. I would say write the message, set it aside for a few minutes, and then read it again, just to make sure. Now, here's the key point about communicating and leading in a remote environment. Remember that leading and communicating remotely calls for a heightened sense of both focus and intentionality to be effective. So much of casual hallway conversation is lost when we're remote, and it calls for us as leaders to be more intentional in how we do things. And as a reminder for today, when I say intentionality, I mean intentionality in meeting, medium, and message. Meeting, the need for the meeting to start with. Medium, how are we going to connect? What's the right way to deliver this message? And then messaging, the structure, delivery, and the clarification that the intended message was what was delivered. If you'll be intentional in your remote leadership communication, you can talk like a leader. This has been the Talk Like a Leader podcast. You can listen to this show every week wherever you get your podcast. If you haven't, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. I'm Guy Harris, and thanks for listening.